It began with laughter. Nervous, shallow laughter. People didn't know what to make of him at first. Just an old man, stooped and quiet, stepping through the tall glass doors of Chase Bank with a sack slung over one shoulder. The sack looked heavy. He looked heavier. The security guard shifted on his feet. A young teller leaned toward her colleague, whispering something behind a half-hidden smile. Then the man spoke. "I am the owner of this bank." The room paused. One beat. Two. Then someone chuckled. Another joined. A wave of amused disbelief rolled through the building like a breeze through wheat. The man didn't blink. He simply stepped forward, moving slowly across the polished marble floor, the sack thudding once with each stride. His voice, soft but clear, cut through the room again. "My name is C.K. Kirby." Somewhere near the counter, a woman scoffed. At the far end, a man smirked and folded his arms. A name from a long-forgotten plaque. A ghost, maybe. No one believed him. But in the next few minutes, something would change. And when it did, no one in that room would ever laugh at him again. Only one man knew the truth, and he had just walked back through the door. The town of Rockview was the kind of place where not much changed. The same faces at the diner, the same names on the bank's board, and the same family, Matt and Sons, etched in brass behind the teller counters. So when C.K. Kirby, if that really was his name, stood there, claiming to be the founder, the room didn't quite know how to react. "Do you have an account with us, sir?" That was the first real question anyone dared to ask. It came from the branch manager, a well-dressed man named Timothy Temp, with a voice trained to sound both polite and firm. The old man didn't flinch. He tilted his head slowly, like someone inspecting a distant memory. "Account?" he echoed. "Son, I built this bank." Another ripple of laughter, less confident this time. But when he dropped the sack onto the marble floor, something changed. The sound was heavy, final, like a gavel. Then he opened it. Out spilled bundles of old banknotes, yellowed, stamped, and wrapped in the original Chase Bank seal. The seal hadn't been used in 50 years. Gasps, silence. The room leaned in, and then came the ledger. A thick, cracked book bound in leather, the pages worn but intact. The kind of record no one keeps, unless they built something from nothing. Temp crouched slowly. His fingers brushed the pages. And then he saw it. A name, a signature, C.K. Kirby. He looked up at the man, whose eyes were steady and still. "That's me," the old man said softly. A hush fell. Even the security guard Stephen, who had been inching forward moments ago, now stood frozen. This wasn't a joke. This was a wound being reopened, and it had been bleeding quietly for over 60 years. The ledger didn't just hold ink and paper. It held proof. And proof has a way of turning stories into truth. "This can't be," Temp muttered. His voice, once confident and composed, now quivered beneath the weight of the past. He turned a few more brittle pages. Each one bore the same name, the same signature, the same story, one that had never made it into the bank's official history. K. Kirby was no ghost. He was real. And he was standing right there. Stephen, the security guard, leaned closer. "Sir," he said, his hand hovering near his holster again, "I'm going to need you to tell us exactly who you are and what you want." The old man's voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It simply remembered. "My name is C.K. Kirby. I founded this bank in 1948. I built it with my own two hands, and I lost it because I trusted the wrong man." A chill passed through the air like wind through a broken window. Customers exchanged nervous glances. Clerks stood still behind the counters. The marble floor beneath them suddenly felt cold. "John Williams," the old man said, his lips pressing tightly on the name. "My business partner, my friend, until the day he decided to take everything we built and make it his alone." Temp blinked. John Williams. The name still carried weight in Rockview, etched into schools, libraries, foundations. A man remembered as a pioneer, a benefactor. But this was another version of him. A version no one had ever dared speak aloud. "He changed the board papers behind my back," Kirby continued. "Said I was unfit, said I was too old, and just like that, they erased me. Every plaque, every record, every mention." His voice didn't rise. It dropped lower, more certain, more powerful. "I became a shadow, not because I died, but because they needed me to disappear." Temp looked at the documents in his hand again. his throat tightening. Everything he thought he knew about the institution, its founders, its history, its name, was cracking apart. The past wasn't buried, it was walking, and it had returned for justice. And as the weight of truth settled into the room, one question began to echo in everyone's mind. If Kirby was right, then who exactly had been running the bank all these years? The silence stretched long in the marble hall. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Temp held the age papers in both hands now, documents so old they looked fragile enough to crumble. But their meaning, that was unshakable. Behind him, the bank's polished walls still bore framed certificates. Matt and Sons, S. 1951. But the dates didn't lie. Kirby's ledger predated them all. A voice broke the silence, young, uncertain. If this is true, then everything we've learned is wrong. It was Maya, one of the tellers, 24, still new, still idealistic. She stepped forward, staring at the bundle of faded banknotes near Kirby's feet. This building was his, she whispered. Temp turned, surprised by her tone. There was no fear, only recognition. Other employees began to shift, glance at one another, weighing the moment. Some had grown up in Rockview, some had family who worked for the bank, and none had ever heard the name C.K. Kirby, because it had been erased. Deliberately. Kirby didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence alone, the sack, the ledger, the documents, was a living contradiction to the story the bank had told for generations. Stephen, the security guard, finally stepped back from his cautious stance. Not because the man no longer posed a threat, but because the real danger wasn't physical. It was historical, it was moral, and it was undeniable. Temp's voice came low, almost ashamed. We've honored the wrong name for decades. Kirby looked up, his face weathered but steady. You honored the name they gave you, not the one they took. The young staff stood on one side, eyes wide, questions burning. The older ones clutched clipboards, unsure how to unlearn what they had taught. And in the middle, an old man, still standing, still waiting. The room was divided not by walls but by what people chose to see, a forgotten relic or a founder returning home. You say they took it from you, Temp said, his voice barely above a whisper. But how can we be sure? Kirby didn't respond right away. He reached once more into the sack and slowly pulled out another bundle, not of cash this time, but papers. Thick, yellowed, stamped, signed, legal documents, contracts, property deeds, board minutes, history and handwriting. Temp stepped forward to receive them, his hands now trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what he might uncover. He skimmed the first page, then the second. His eyes stopped on a single signature, and he froze. Oh my God. His knees almost buckled. Stephen leaned closer. What is it? Temp turned to him, his face pale. These documents, they show that Kirby never sold the bank, never gave up ownership, not legally, not ever. The room inhaled. Kirby nodded, not triumphantly, but like a man watching a long overdue truth finally rise to the surface. They didn't just take my bank, he said quietly. They took my name, my dignity, my legacy. Temp looked back at the framed certificates behind the counter, bearing the name Matt and Sons, the family he'd served loyally for 20 years. He suddenly felt like he'd been guarding a museum built on a lie. The betrayal wasn't just Kirby's. It belonged to all of them now. Everyone who had believed unknowingly in a stolen story. Stephen's hand dropped away from his belt. There was no need for force. There was only one thing that needed to be protected now: the truth. Kirby stood silently as the past unfolded before him. The documents, the ledger, the banknotes, his very presence. Proof was no longer a question. It was a decision, and someone would have to make it. Temp held the papers tight, but what weighed heavier was the choice. Stay loyal to the name on the wall, or honor the man standing right in front of him. The room no longer felt like a bank. It felt like a courtroom, a church, a confession. No one was laughing now. Even the clocks on the wall seemed quieter, as if time itself were listening. Temp stared at the documents, page after page of stamped signatures, official seals, and ink faded by time but sharpened by truth. He had spent his entire career honoring names engraved in metal. Now he was holding proof that those names had been carved into someone else's silence. He looked up. Mr. Kirby. His voice broke slightly. If what you say is true, and God help me, it looks like it is, Why come back now? The old man exhaled, long and slow. He looked around the room, not with anger, not even with sorrow, but with something deeper. Resolve. Because I finally realized they can take your name, they can take your story, but they can't keep it buried. Not forever. Maya stepped forward again, the young teller. She held one of the old banknotes in her hand. She studied it like it was a holy relic, her eyes flicking between its worn edges and Kirby's face. Then she did something no one expected. She placed it gently on the counter. A silent offering, a small act of reverence. Then another employee followed. Then another. One by one, they approached Kirby and laid his past before him, piece by piece, note by note, paper by paper. Even Stephen, the security guard no longer at attention, gave a slight nod. He's not a threat, he said quietly. He's a chapter we forgot to read. Temp remained still, frozen in place, his lips trembling. He had served the bank, but he'd never served the truth, not until now. Finally he spoke, his voice softer than before. This isn't over. He said it not as a warning, but as a beginning. And Kirby? He said nothing, because he didn't need to. He had waited decades for this moment, not to shout, not to fight, but to be seen, to be heard, to be believed, and for the first time in half a century, he was. But before justice could begin, one more door still had to open. Temp stood at the edge of the hallway, just outside the boardroom door. The documents were still in his hands, but his certainty had crumbled. He knew what had to happen next. The board of directors, descendants of the Matt family, would not accept this quietly. They would push back. They would question every stamp, every page, every signature. They would say Kirby was lying. They would drag the truth through courtrooms and headlines and delays. And Kirby? He might not have that kind of time left. Temp turned slowly, meeting the old man's eyes across the lobby. They'll fight this, he said. You know that, don't you? Kirby gave the faintest nod. They fought it the first time. That didn't stop me either. His voice had no bitterness in it now, only stillness, the kind that comes from carrying a truth too long. Then something unexpected happened. Maya stepped beside Kirby, then another teller, then Stephen. One by one, they formed a quiet line behind him, their eyes forward, not just in support, but in quiet protest against forgetting. They weren't just employees anymore. They were witnesses. Temp looked down at the documents one last time. They were more than paper. They were a mirror, reflecting who the bank said it was and who it might still become. He straightened up and gave Kirby a solemn nod. Come with me, he said. Let's tell them what they tried to forget. Kirby didn't move right away. He looked around the lobby, at the chandeliers, the brass plaques, the marble floors, all built on a silence that had lasted too long. Then he stepped forward. His body was still frail, but his footsteps, unshakable. He disappeared down the hall, flanked by those who had once doubted him, now walking beside him. And outside, the sun dipped lower behind Rockview's narrow streets. The town moved on, unaware of what was unfolding behind those glass doors. But inside the bank, a page had turned. Not just in the ledger, but in history. And sometimes all it takes is one man standing long enough in the truth for the silence to break. This story wasn't about money. It was about memory, and the courage it takes to reclaim it. Here at Mia, we believe some stories were never lost, just waiting for someone to tell them. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a truth long buried, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the start of someone else's reckoning.